I never thought I'd find myself scrolling through my own private nightmare. At first, it was just a nagging feeling. A strange chill when I noticed Melanie clutching her phone like it was a lifeline and retreating behind walls of silence that hadn't been there before. Our once vibrant conversations turned into brief exchanges, and her laughter, once warm and inviting, now sounded distant and hollow. I began to wonder what had shifted between us. The change wasn't sudden, but it was unmistakable. Melanie became increasingly withdrawn, almost secretive with her phone, as if every buzz and notification held a message she couldn't wait to hide from me. She offered flimsy excuses about late work emails or urgent personal matters that she couldn't discuss. The warmth between us, the intimacy we once cherished, started to vanish like the last rays of sunlight at dusk. Then came the day that shattered the thin veil of trust one was clinging to. I was in the kitchen when I heard the water running in the bathroom. Melanie was showering. Out of habit and an overwhelming sense of loneliness, I opened my laptop and casually glanced at her emails, thinking nothing of it. That's when I saw it. An unfinished letter addressed to someone named Travis. My heart pounded as I read her words. "Last night was incredible. When will we see each other again?" My mind spun in disbelief. Who was Travis? Why was my wife writing with such passion to someone else? Before I could process the shock, my eyes caught another message, an unfinished reply that cut off mid-sentence. "I miss you too, my love. He doesn't suspect anything." The words echoed in the silent kitchen, each letter a dagger to my heart. The betrayal was no longer a whisper of doubt. It was a full-blown storm raging inside me. I felt an unbearable mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. How had the woman I vowed to love and cherish grown so distant, so deceitful? In that moment, the weight of 1,000 unasked questions crushed me. I was reeling from the realization that the person I thought I knew was living a double life. Every memory of shared smiles, every promise made in the quiet hours of the night, now felt tainted with lies. I was left grappling with the raw, jagged truth of betrayal, a truth that shattered my world and left me wondering how to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. I sat there, paralyzed by the enormity of it all, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, so when Melanie told me she was meeting a friend, I decided to follow her. I needed proof, a confirmation of the suspicions that had been gnawing at me since I discovered that email. I trailed her discreetly, keeping a safe distance as she made her way to a sleek, upscale part of town. My heart sank when I saw her enter an expensive restaurant, a place where the average check easily surpassed $600. The ambience was lavish, the kind of spot you'd expect for secret rendezvous and discreet conversations. I took a seat outside, blending into the urban scenery, and watched through the window as she was led to a table where Travis was already waiting. It wasn't long before I saw what I feared most. Melanie, normally so reserved, was completely at ease with him. She laughed freely and leaned in close, their conversation filled with an intimacy that felt like a betrayal in slow motion. The moment my gut twisted in agony came when she, in a display of pure, unrestrained affection, reached out and pulled Travis by his tie, leading him in for a kiss right on the busy street outside the restaurant. It was a public display, a dare that made my blood boil with a mix of humiliation and rage. Unable to contain myself any longer, I walked right up to them. The cool night air did nothing to calm the storm raging inside me as I stood before them, locked in a moment of stunned silence. Then, with a voice that trembled not with fear but with a controlled fury, I calmly asked, "So is this your girlfriend now, Melanie?" The words hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. For a second, the world seemed to pause. Travis's eyes flickered with surprise and a hint of mischief, while Melanie's expression shifted from pleasure to shock. I could see the mask of pretense start to crumble, and in that instant, the truth of her double life lay bare for all to see. In that charged moment, the restaurant's chatter faded into a background hum, and all that mattered was the raw pain of betrayal. I felt exposed, humiliated, yet resolute. The public nature of the scene made it even more unbearable. The cruel irony of love turned into a spectacle I hadn't signed up for. As I stood there, heart pounding and mind racing with unanswered questions, I knew that the carefully constructed world I'd believed in was nothing but a facade. That night, as I walked away from the scene, a mixture of sorrow and anger churned within me. Every step echoed the finality of a trust shattered, a life irreversibly altered. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was painfully clear. The truth had been exposed, and nothing would ever be the same again. I remember the shock that coursed through my veins as I stood there, the bitter taste of betrayal filling my mouth. Melanie's eyes, once a window to the gentle soul I thought I knew, now burned with a fierce, almost cruel glimmer. In that moment, as she looked at me with a derisive smirk, she didn't even bother to feign remorse or offer excuses. Instead, she launched into a tirade that shattered any remnants of the love I had clung to. Without hesitation or a hint of regret, she scoffed at my presence. "You really think you're some kind of man?" she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. Every syllable seemed meticulously chosen to wound, a verbal lashing designed to humiliate. Her words cut deeper than any physical blow ever could, branding me with a sense of inadequacy that I couldn't shake. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, as she ridiculed everything I thought I was. The woman I had loved was now a stranger, cold, calculating, and utterly indifferent to the devastation she was causing. Across the table, Travis, a man who was 12 years my senior, leaned back in his chair with an amused, condescending smile. His eyes, filled with an unsettling blend of superiority and amusement, betrayed his confidence in this twisted new dynamic. The contrast between his composed demeanor and my raw, exposed vulnerability was jarring. It was as if he derived pleasure from my humiliation, his silent laughter punctuating Melanie's scornful remarks. I felt diminished, less than a man, as though I were a mere obstacle in the way of a more dominant, irresistible force. Melanie continued, her voice rising with a haughty certainty that left no room for argument. "I've known for a long time that I needed someone who truly embodies what it means to be an alpha," she declared boldly. Every word reverberated with a conviction that was both disturbing and undeniable. It wasn't just an attack on my masculinity, it was a declaration that she had already made her choice. With every syllable, she seemed to build a case for herself, one where loyalty was a luxury I could never afford to offer. It was a stark, brutal redefinition of the person I once believed I was, and in that redefinition, I was rendered obsolete. Before I could muster any retort, she leaned in close, her lips nearly brushing my ear as she whispered with an icy finality, "Get used to it, Alex. I'm not going anywhere." Those words, meant to cement her betrayal, echoed in my mind like a death knell. They were the ultimate dismissal, a signal that the chapter of our life together was irreversibly closed. Her voice, soft yet laden with an unwavering finality, left no doubt that I was now an accessory to her new reality. The tenderness we once shared had been extinguished, replaced by a merciless declaration of ownership over a life that no longer had space for me. I stood there, grappling with a surge of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. Rage, despair, and an almost palpable sense of loss intertwined in a chaotic dance within me. It was as though the ground beneath my feet had crumbled, leaving me suspended in a void where the person I had known was completely and utterly gone. Every word Melanie uttered echoed the certainty of her new identity, a woman who had traded compassion and loyalty for power and self-interest. In that moment, as I tried to piece together the shards of my broken pride, I realized that I was witnessing the final act of a play I had unknowingly starred in. Melanie had always been capable of surprises, but nothing could have prepared me for this. The vibrant memories of our shared past now clashed violently with the harsh reality unfolding before my eyes. It was as if I were watching a slow-motion tragedy where every insult, every dismissive gesture, was a nail in the coffin of our former life. The restaurant around us faded into insignificance. The clinking of cutlery, the hum of casual conversation, even the soft background music, all of it melted away in the wake of this personal catastrophe. I was left alone with the raw intensity of my own thoughts, a silent witness to the disintegration of a bond one once held sacred. I felt utterly exposed, vulnerable in a way that stripped me of every pretense of manhood or dignity. In the midst of the chaos, I tried to reconcile the woman before me with the one I thought I knew. How could the same person who had once promised undying love now revel in my humiliation? The answer, as cold and unforgiving as it was, lay in the void between what I expected and what reality had become. Melanie had long ago made her choice, and in doing so, she had not only redefined her own identity but had also reshaped the contours of my world. I was forced to confront the painful truth. In her eyes, I was no longer enough. And as I stood there, stripped of any semblance of hope, her final words sealed my fate, echoing in the hollowness of a life that would never be the same again. I couldn't let her have the satisfaction of watching me crumble. Fueled by a mix of raw pain and a desperate need to reclaim control, I stormed out of the restaurant with one clear goal in mind: to secure what was legally mine. The drive to the bank was a blur of anger and determination. Every red light felt like a punctuation mark to the bitter sentence I was about to write in our shared history. As soon as I walked through those sterile bank doors, I felt like I was stepping into my fortress. I explained the situation to the teller with a calm precision that belied the turbulence inside me. I needed to sever every financial tie between us. With deliberate swiftness, I instructed the bank to separate all my accounts from hers, effectively leaving Melanie with a zero balance. Each keystroke on the bank terminal, each stamped form, felt like a strike against the betrayal that had upended my life. I couldn't help but think about the marriage contract we had signed 3 years ago. It wasn't something I had ever imagined I'd lean on in a moment like this, but now it felt like my lifeline. That document, once just a precaution, had become the linchpin of my counterattack. Thanks to it, the entire $1.2 million house was legally and irrevocably mine. A home I would never share with someone who had so carelessly torn apart the foundation of our life together. The knowledge that I still had something concrete in my name bolstered me. A small spark of hope amid the ashes of our disintegrated marriage. It wasn't long before the news reached Melanie. I caught a glimpse of her reaction. A shock so raw that it made her complexion drain of all color. I later learned that when she discovered the financial coup I had orchestrated, she turned pale, her eyes widening with a mix of disbelief and fury. Yet, even as panic flickered across her features, she fought to maintain an air of cool indifference. I could almost see the internal storm raging beneath that carefully constructed mask of composure. In the days that followed, our interactions shifted. No longer was there the pretense of amicable separation or the lingering remnants of a shared past. Every call, every message was laced with the tension of two people who were now fully at war. While I felt vindicated by my decisive move, the victory was bittersweet. I was reclaiming my identity and my financial stability, but at the cost of the illusions of love and trust that had once defined our union. The process of disentangling our financial lives was both methodical and cathartic. I reviewed every joint account, every shared investment with a surgeon's precision, cutting away the remnants of what once was. Each document signed, each confirmation email received, was a testament to my resolve to never again be rendered powerless by someone I once loved unconditionally. I knew that money could never mend the emotional wounds, but it was a step toward rebuilding a life that was solely my own. I started to see my newfound independence as both a shield and a sword. With every financial boundary I established, I was drawing a clear line between the person I was and the person I no longer wished to be. Someone who had been blindsided by deceit and left reeling in its aftermath. That separation was a declaration. I was not going to be dragged down by her lies any longer. Yet, even in this victory, a part of me felt hollow. The stark contrast between the cold efficiency of the bank's transactions and the emotional turmoil that had led me here was jarring. I had taken back control, yes, but the cost was a deep-seated grief for the future we might have had. The house, now solely mine, stood as a monument to what was lost. A tangible reminder of a shared dream turned sour. And so, with every check cleared and every account closed, I stepped further away from the woman who had betrayed me, cementing the fact that our paths were now irreversibly divergent. The financial blow was more than just a legal maneuver. It was a symbolic act of liberation. Melanie's shocked silence and feigned composure only underscored the finality of our split. In that moment, I realized that the true counterattack wasn't just about reclaiming my assets. It was about reclaiming my dignity and rewriting the narrative of my life. Looking back, I can say that in that moment of cold, calculated retribution, I found a small measure of strength amid the wreckage of our failed marriage. The bank had become my battleground, and every financial decision a step toward healing. A reminder that even when betrayal leaves you feeling completely powerless, you still have the strength to fight back and build something new from the ruins. I knew I couldn't let this fiasco fester any longer. Amidst the chaos, I reached for my phone and dialed Jordan, an old friend who'd spent years in corporate security. Over the years, Jordan had become my go-to guy whenever things went sideways. I needed hard facts, something tangible to add to the growing pile of evidence against Melanie's new paramour. When he answered, his calm, reassuring voice cut through my tumultuous thoughts. "Alex, what's up?" he asked, concern lacing his tone. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Jordan, I need a favor. I need you to dig up whatever you can on Travis. I'm not sure if I'm dealing with a smooth-talking lover or something far more dangerous." His silence on the other end of the line was telling. Within minutes, Jordan returned with information that shattered any remnants of the seductive image Travis had tried to cultivate. It turned out Travis wasn't just a charming bad boy. He had a sordid history. Jordan informed me that there were 4 separate complaints of sexual harassment lodged against him. Each one painted a disturbing picture of a man who used his charm as a weapon, leaving a trail of broken trust and shattered lives in his wake. As if that weren't enough, Jordan's next revelation struck me even harder. Travis had been fired from his previous job for fraud. Apparently, he'd been involved in schemes that defrauded unsuspecting clients, tarnishing the reputation of his former employer in the process. This wasn't the man I'd thought I knew. This was someone who thrived on manipulation, someone who'd built a new life on a foundation of lies. The final blow came when Jordan explained that Travis's latest brush with success had already begun to crumble. His new company, in an effort to protect their reputation, had rejected his candidacy before his first day on the job. In a matter of days, the slick, confident persona he'd paraded around was reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. Suddenly, he wasn't the alpha male that Melanie had boasted about. He was a man with a tarnished record and no prospects. Hearing all of this, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. Vindication because the man who had shattered my world was now exposed for everything he truly was. Sorrow because Melanie, in her misguided pursuit of a real alpha, was left with nothing. The woman who once had it all now found herself entangled with a man whose reputation was in tatters, leaving her future as bleak as his. I couldn't help but reflect on the irony of it all. Melanie, in her relentless pursuit of someone who would make her feel powerful, had chosen a man whose history was a litany of abuse and deceit. And in doing so, she had not only sabotaged any chance of a stable future for herself, but had also sealed her fate as someone whose choices would haunt her for years to come. When I hung up with Jordan, I felt a heavy weight lift off my shoulders, even as a new burden began to form. I had the evidence I needed, a clear, unambiguous record of Travis's past misdeeds and his inevitable downfall. The knowledge that his new company had already distanced itself from him was a bitter pill for him to swallow, and it meant that Melanie's dreams of a glamorous, untouchable lifestyle were crumbling right alongside his. I knew that this revelation was the turning point. The scales had finally tipped, not in favor of the deceitful allure of passion, but in favor of hard, undeniable facts. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about exposing the dangerous, toxic influence that Travis represented and the collateral damage inflicted upon everyone in his wake. As I sat back, letting the weight of this new information sink in, I couldn't help but think about the cascading consequences of betrayal. Melanie's choices had led her down a path from which there was no easy return. And now, with Travis's past coming back to bite him and her prospects diminishing by the minute, the future looked increasingly uncertain. In that moment, a sense of grim satisfaction mingled with a lingering sadness for the loss of what we once had. The game had changed completely. No longer was it a simple tale of infidelity. It had become a battle of truths, where the past clawed its way into the present, setting the stage for an even more unpredictable future. It wasn't long before the entire weight of the world came crashing down. I'd barely had time to process the financial coup and the revelations about Travis when a new, equally devastating blow hit me. A family drama I hadn't seen coming. Word of everything spread like wildfire, carried on the winds of gossip until it reached Melanie's family. I remember that day vividly. A chill in the air, an unsettling feeling that something was about to shatter beyond repair. And then it happened. Uncle Frank, the family's notorious gossip magnate, made sure everyone knew the full extent of the betrayal. With his usual flair for dramatic storytelling, he spilled every sordid detail: Melanie's affair with Travis, her cold dismissal of me, and even the way she'd flaunted her new alpha lifestyle in front of my eyes. The fallout was immediate. Just a few hours after I'd seen that bank transaction come through, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Melanie's parents standing there, their faces etched with a mix of fury and disbelief. They weren't the kind of people to mince words. Their presence was like an unwelcome gust of icy wind, carrying the final condemnation of everything Melanie had done. "Alex," her mother started, her voice trembling with controlled anger. "We need to talk about Melanie." There was no preamble, no niceties, just raw, unfiltered disapproval. Her father stood by her side, arms crossed, his eyes steely and unyielding. Before I could muster a greeting or even a question, her father cut in sharply. "This isn't just about a mistake, Alex. It's about choices, her choices. And now she must reap the consequences." His words reverberated through the room, a final judgment that seemed to seal her fate. Then, almost as if it were part of some grim ritual, Melanie's parents presented her with a check for $5,000. It was as if they were severing all ties, delivering a parting gift to cushion the fall of her reckless decisions. The check wasn't just a monetary transaction. It was a statement, a declaration that they were done supporting her misguided pursuits and the toxic path she'd chosen. Melanie, ever the one to fight back, tried to argue. I could see the desperation in her eyes as she attempted to defend herself, to plead for understanding or at least a second chance. But her father was unyielding. "It's not a mistake, it's your choice," he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Now you reap the consequences." Their words cut deeper than any bank statement or public humiliation. In that moment, the final pieces of her world crumbled. Not only had she betrayed our marriage, tarnished her reputation, and aligned herself with a man whose past was riddled with deceit and abuse, but she had also irrevocably alienated the very people who had once been her safety net. Her family, who should have been her strongest support, were now turning their backs on her completely. I stood there, an unwilling witness to the collapse of what she'd built for herself. It was a moment of bittersweet vindication and profound sorrow. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction justice, in a way, had been served. But the other part of me couldn't shake the tragic reality of it all. Melanie wasn't just losing a partner. She was losing her home, her family's support, and any future she might have once envisioned. As her parents left, their footsteps echoing down the hall, the weight of what had just transpired settled heavily around me. The check for $5,000 was more than a piece of paper. It was the final nail in the coffin of our shared past, a symbol of a life that was now irreversibly over. I couldn't help but reflect on the cascade of events that had led to this final blow, each act of betrayal, every lie, all culminating in a public and personal reckoning. Standing alone in the quiet aftermath, I realized that sometimes the most painful part of a breakup isn't the loss of love, but the unraveling of a shared history. In this case, Melanie's choices had not only destroyed our marriage but had also left her isolated and abandoned by those who once loved her unconditionally. The family condemnation wasn't just a reaction. It was the final judgment, a mirror reflecting the truth of her actions back at her. And as I closed the door that day, I felt a complex mix of relief and melancholy. The final blow had been dealt, and there was no turning back. The story of our lives was now a collection of shattered dreams and irreversible decisions. A tale of how betrayal and misguided ambition could lead to a downfall so complete that even the safety net of family would crumble away. 2 months later, the fragile world that Melanie and Travis had tried to build together finally crumbled like a house of cards. I'd kept a careful eye on the unfolding chaos, partly out of lingering concern, mostly because it was impossible to ignore the irony. They had both believed that together they could reinvent themselves, escape the past, and create a future that glittered with promise. But promises made in the haze of rebellion rarely withstand the harsh light of reality. I remember the day it all became painfully clear. The news reached me through mutual acquaintances and the occasional social media post. Travis, once so brazen about his alpha status, had lost his job. With the sting of a tarnished reputation still fresh from his corporate disqualification, he found himself incapable of maintaining the image he'd so carefully curated. Without a steady income and with every door shut in his face, the man who had once strutted with confidence began to look small, diminished, almost pitiful. It wasn't long before the very persona he had clung to as his shield disintegrated before everyone's eyes. As Travis's world unraveled, so did Melanie's. The veneer of superiority and defiance that she had worn so confidently melted away, revealing a growing desperation underneath. For a while, I could almost hear the ticking of an internal clock in her every frantic gesture. A countdown to the moment when her patience would run out. And run out it did. The 2 months of unstable cohabitation, of clashing ambitions and unmet expectations, culminated in a series of heated confrontations and bitter regrets. It wasn't just a relationship in trouble. It was a collision of shattered dreams. I vividly recall one of her last desperate phone calls to her parents, where her voice, once so filled with haughty certainty, now wavered with pleading. "Please, I need help," she had said, the words sounding foreign coming from someone who'd always prided herself on being in control. But her parents, still reeling from the sting of earlier confrontations and the weight of Uncle Frank's revelations, refused to offer her shelter. Their disappointment was palpable, as if her reckless choices had not only burned bridges with me but had scorched every semblance of hope she'd ever had. When they finally spoke, her father's words still echoed in my mind. "It's not a mistake, it's your choice. Now you reap the consequences." With that, the door was shut on her last plea for familial support. Meanwhile, life took on a starkly different hue for me. The financial counterattack I'd launched had not only severed the toxic ties of our failed marriage but had also set the stage for a completely new beginning. I was left with the $1.2 million house, a symbol of reclaimed power and the promise of a fresh start. I spent long evenings in that house, each room a silent testament to battles fought and won, and each window offering a glimpse of a future unburdened by the past. I took solace in small routines, tending to the garden, rearranging my furniture to suit a new aesthetic, and even hosting friends who reminded me that life, despite its cruelties, could still be joyful. Every time I crossed the threshold of my own home, I felt a mixture of triumph and a subtle twinge of sorrow. Triumph for having preserved my integrity and built something solely mine. Sorrow for the inevitable loneliness that accompanies such hard-won freedom. I often found myself reflecting on the fickleness of fate, how one woman's pursuit of an unattainable ideal and one man's refusal to play by the rules had ultimately cost them everything. The transformation was complete. While Melanie's world disintegrated into a series of empty promises and regretful choices, I was slowly piecing together a life that felt authentically mine. I wasn't proud of everything that had happened. I tasted bitterness and felt the raw sting of betrayal, but in the aftermath, I discovered a surprising resilience. I learned that sometimes the most devastating losses pave the way for the most genuine victories. Now, as I sit in the quiet comfort of my home, I realize that this was not merely about revenge or retribution. It was about reclaiming a sense of self that had been buried beneath layers of deceit and disappointment. Melanie and Travis's attempts at a second act ended in a dismal finale. A jobless Travis stripped of his once vaunted alpha image, and a Melanie who, deprived of her familial safety net, found herself alone and adrift. In contrast, I emerged as the unlikely winner. My home, my fortress, is a constant reminder that despite the scars, I have the strength to build something new, While I don't relish the pain of what transpired, I can't help but acknowledge the strange liberation that follows the fall of false idols. Now, each day brings with it the opportunity to create a life untainted by past betrayals. A life where I can finally live on my own terms, surrounded by the tangible rewards of resilience and hard-won wisdom.